Welcome back, listeners, to a brand new episode of the New Standard. You're checking out the program on Wednesday, November 27th, 2024. Want to wish everybody who's checking out the program or who will listen to the program a happy Thanksgiving. Want to wish a happy Thanksgiving to my entire family, as well as give a happy Thanksgiving wish to the entirety of Steeler Nation. As always, if you want to participate in the program, hit us with a like and a subscribe. Put a comment in the chat and we will address it. We'll chime into it and talk about it. Also, we will be putting the podcast out this week as well. You should be able to catch that a little bit later in the week. As always, when we do the pregame show, and big up to my guy, Big Mel, big up to the brothers of Omega Sci-Fi. On this particular episode, we take a look back at the last one. We took a couple of thoughts on Mike Tomlin's presser. We're going to take a look at the matchup between the Steelers and the Bungles, and I will give you my prediction. But my prediction is a bunch of turkey. I know that turkey stuffing, mac and cheese, dressing, all that good stuff, pecan pie, sweet potato cobblers. That's that. That's my prediction is eating a ton of turkey, falling asleep, and watching a bunch of football games tomorrow. But let's jump into a quick, brief look into the last one. And I know a lot has been said about the Steelers' red zone offense, which currently, unfortunately for the Steelers, is ranked 30th in the National Football League. They are converting 44.74 of their red zone attempts become touchdowns. That is woefully inefficient. And I think at the end of the day, if this team does not win a playoff game or they don't get far, I think the issue will revolve around largely the red zone. But as much as the offensive red zone has been an issue, the last four games have been an issue for the defense in the red zone as well. Over the last 4 weeks, the defense has gone from being ranked second in the National Football League in the red zone, 37.5% of opposing offenses converted touchdowns in the red zone, all the way to over 50%, 51%. So their rank in the red zone has dropped from 2 to 11. In the last 3 games in the red zone, teams are converting close to 90%. That is a recipe for disaster. You can't let teams convert red zone chances and you don't convert red zone chances. That is not a recipe, for winning football games. So, one thing moving forward, when you look at this offense and Arthur Smith and those guys on that side of the ball, they've got to be more efficient. I think they have to start spamming Fryermuth and Washington in the red zone to add some diversity to the things that they're trying to do. But in the red zone, in terms of offense and defense, we're going to get back to that defense on both sides of the ball. You have to execute. You have to execute. You have to execute right. It's execution, it's play calls, and it's scheme. You combine all those things, and if you're 30th in red zone conversions, just in touchdowns, it's got to get fixed. You've got to fix it on all levels. And I think a lot of times as fans, we want to make it very easy in terms of the blame game. And when you're that bad in the red zone, it's a bit of everything. Bottom line, the execution is not good enough. What you're calling is not good enough. None of it is good enough. And if you take a look at the game film, if you look at the last game against the Browns, Pat Fryermuth was running free all game long in the red zone. There are plenty of opportunities where you could convert those and possibly get touchdowns and win that ball game. That has to improve. But on the other token, again, like I said earlier, you can't have a bad red zone offense and a bad red zone defense, especially when the defense is supposed to be the foundation of your team. You can't let teams convert close to 90% of their red zone trips, especially when you aren't converting red zone trips. So it's something that has to get fixed, and it's bigger than a nitpick. And one of the things I think that is hurting the red zone offense is their inability, like Mel said, their short yardage offense is bad. And if you can't run it in the red area, it's going to be tough to convert. Also, if you don't have a mobile quarterback, it's going to be tough because mobility, I believe, overall, as a quarterback, it helps the offensive play caller because they don't have to call games perfectly. They don't have to get in the right call more than often the time than they do. They can get it wrong and get bailed out by, say, for instance, Lamar's legs or some mobility to buy extra yards, get you into a more favorable down and distance to be able to convert a third down. So they're going to have to get that fixed. And they're also going to have to get that fixed in the red zone. And I think also in the red zone, it's pressure. They're not getting sufficient amount of pressure, in my opinion, to make some of those throws more tight window throws. Let me jump into this comment from Anthony Picano. He said, Smith wants to run and have the line impose their will on an opponent, but this line isn't at that level yet. And you're probably right. Friend of the program, Jim Wexell, said on his show, and you guys should check out Jim Wexell's show. You should check out SteelCityInsider.net, that the fourth down, to go for it on fourth down multiple times in that game was ridiculous because the offensive line had not earned that right by running the ball well enough in that game for them to do it. I understand that perfectly. Although I will say the Young Bucks are playing good. McCormick and Frazier, Raekwon and Ghost are doing their thing. And again, you're checking out the new standard. Happy Thanksgiving. Steelers versus Bungles. And Mel brought up another point on the thread about Fields being able to audible. Teams are selling out on the ground game. And let me just say something about Fields, because a lot has been mentioned about the red zone packaging or the red zone packages with Fields. Here's my thought to it. I would rather that the Steelers coaches figure out how to be better in the red zone with Russell Wilson, as opposed to having to augment the red zone with Justin Fields just to make it functional. Get the red zone offense functional to a point where you're converting at least middle of the league or higher with Russ. Then you can add Justin Fields as that element. But to have to move the ball between the 20s to take your starting quarterback out, who you trust to play 90% of the snaps in the red zone, to me is ridiculous. Fix the red zone shit. Fix that. Don't add Justin Fields to the mix and overcomplicate it. However, if it's something that you just want to add, you want to sprinkle in, great, sure, augment it, but get the regular red zone offense right. And also, you got to get that red zone defense right. When teams are converting 90% in the red zone, you can't have that. That is a recipe for disaster. That is a recipe for a very tough second half. And again, you're checking out the new standard. Happy Thanksgiving. Steelers versus Bungles preview. The other thing that was going around in Steeler world was a lot of talk and I even said it myself, about TJ Watt. Where's TJ? Where TJ at? Where TJ at? And Robert, I can't bring Neil back if Neil doesn't want to come back. I can't make that happen. I'm trying, but I can't make that happen. But so you're just going to have to live with me. And hopefully that is enough. But when you look at TJ Watt, and I think Trey Essex said it best. And Trey Essex, and he's a great follow on X or on Twitter. And he just said, look, bottom line, great players go through slumps. Great players have tough games. And no, Mel, it's not that Neil didn't want to come back. He's got some other irons in the fire or some logs on the fire that prevent him from coming back. It's not that he didn't want to. If he could, he would. And me and Neil talk all the time. So it's not didn't want to thing. So I don't want to put that out there. But also, I mean, Trey basically said it. I mean, TJ might just be in a slump, but that means that other guys have to pick up the slack. And that means from a schematic standpoint, you might have to help TJ out. Instead of TJ Watt playing a ton of wide nine, maybe you move him around the formation. Maybe you put him in more line games instead of that wide nine, wide 11, where he's pretty much identified and can be targeted by a chip, by a back, a tight end, and get blocked by the tackle. So it might be, something that the coaching staff needs to figure out in terms of getting him more free and getting him more available within the scheme itself. But overall, I think when I look at this football team, the red zone stuff on both sides of the ball, I think are the biggest things for me. I think the one that will get fixed quicker than the other will be the defensive side of the ball. Let me jump into Melvin's comment. He said TJ is not in a slump. TJ is getting hit 3 times before getting on the quarterback. That means someone else needs to step up. He is. However, I will say this. If you isolate, particularly from that game against Conklin was handling TJ one-on-one. I looked at about maybe 10 to 11 snaps, maybe 12 snaps, and, he was handling TJ. TJ did not have a good game, but that's possible. He can. TJ is not supernatural, although we want TJ to be supernatural. He just had a bad game. That can happen. So I would put the TJ stuff, just wait and see. Let's wait and see. But I think the pressure has to ratchet up. I might want to see them blitz a little bit more as well. Maybe you bring an extra body. You try to bring 5, bring 6, possibly in some situations. One thing that popped up in Steeler news this week as well, and I want to ask you guys on the chat, true or false? Being the head coach of a college team, specifically North Carolina, is more prestigious than being the offensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Which one, true or false? From my perspective, it's hard for me to say. Arthur Smith has been a coordinator. Arthur Smith has been a head coach. It's hard for me to answer that or say true or false. I would think being a head coach is always more prestigious. If you can be the head coach of a I don't know if it's Power 5, Power 3, or an ACC program, run the program, mold it in your image, that's more prestigious, that's something that's more prestigious than being the offensive coordinator for the Steelers. That's just my opinion. But I want you guys to jump into your opinion as well. But this week, going into this weekend, big game, another big game. And this is where the rubber meets the road. Like, the Steelers are going to have to step up. If they're going to make a run and win this division, they still got a 1-game lead over the Ravens. They got to go on the road to win a tough ball game against a divisional opponent. And the Bengals, like the Ravens, present multiple challenges on the offensive side of football, although a little bit different. I think when you think of the Bengals or the Bungles, you think of Joe Burrow and that receiving core. Over Joe Burrow's career, he has a passer rating of 88. He's thrown for 1,268 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions in 5 games against the Steelers. Steelers didn't really deal with him last year too much because I think he was out I'm looking at the 5 games in which he's played the Steelers. In 2022, he lit the Steelers up twice. Uh, One game he had a passer rating of 104.1. Uh, Joe Burrow's been tough for them to handle. And the reason he's also tough for them to handle is because they also got Jamar Chase. And when you look at the last 5 games, they're averaging about 24 points a game against the Steelers, including that one in 2021 where they got 41 points. They followed that up in 2022, scoring 37. But the Steelers faced backups last year, and they scored 10 and 11, respectively. But this is going to be a tough matchup, I think, for the Steelers. I think thematically, the theme of this is you have to control the running game with as few assets as possible or numbers on the defensive side of the ball, because you're going to have to tackle the catch well and keep everything in front. You cannot let Chase and Higgins get thrown the ball over your heads. They can't do that. You can't let them do that. So I think you're going to see more cover 2. I think you're going to see some cover 6, some cover 4, but I think you're going to see rotation into those coverages from cover 1, cover 3 with a high safety. I think you might see Minkah Fitzpatrick play a more significant part of this game and be a little bit around the ball a little bit more. Let me jump into these comments because Felicia and Mel are killing me. And Mel wrote, Felicia Arthur is better. However, the bar is super duper low. Nothing worse than facing a division team with nothing to lose and loves being a spoiler. Let me add to that, though. They are facing a divisional team coming off of a loss and a mini bye, where the coaches have had an opportunity to self-scout. And I think the Steelers realized that they let one go in Cleveland, that was a game that they think they could have gotten, they could have handled, they could have won. I think the Steelers are going to come into this game, chomping at the bit to get after the Bungles. I think on the offensive side of football, the Steelers got to run the ball well, period. They got to run the ball well, and they've got to pass protect well. I mean, you're talking about in terms of the NFL, the Bengals have the league's leading pass rusher, number 1 in sacks with Hendrickson. You've got to get him blocked. If you can get Henderson blocked and run successfully on early downs and stay on schedule, I think they can win this game. But like Double H said, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. Again, you're checking out the new standard. Happy Thanksgiving. Steelers versus Bungles preview. Divisional games are wonky. And what I thought was wonky about this game, speaking of divisional games being wonky, I was surprised to see that the Steelers were 2.5-point dogs. I think that is going to help motivate the Steelers as well, that they're 8-3 going up against a team who I believe is 8-3, or excuse me, 3-8, and they're underdogs, and they're 2.5-point underdogs. And I could see where Tomlin will use that as motivation. And excuse me, the Bengals or the Bungles are 4-7, and use that as motivation to light some fire under the Steelers. But it's not going to be much fire that needs to be lit under the Steelers. It's a divisional game. And, they've got to win this game. This is a must-have game, because you can't then, after this game, lose this game. Luckily you have the Browns after that. But, man, you've got to start getting some dubs again, and you've got to get on the right side of the ledger, because with their second half of their schedule, it can go bad very quickly with the teams that they're playing in the second half of their schedule. Again, I think this is a game where they have to run the ball successfully, and I hope that Warren gets the bulk of the carries. He looks like way more the dynamic back. I think he runs better with this style of offensive line, doesn't have to hold its blocks as long. I think he's certain and sudden. but yet still patient. I just like the way he runs behind this offensive line much better than Najee Harris. The other thing that stood out in the last couple of games is the time of possession advantage that the Steelers have had. They've had an advantage of about 10 minutes a game over the last three. And that's something that I think is going to have to as well continue in the game. You can't give this explosive Cincinnati offense time and time again to light you up and possibly throw it over your head. I would love for the Steelers to go in the world, be able to come out and really set the tone early and jump on the Bengals instead of playing this kind of game where they kind of slowly get to it and possibly get behind the Bengals. Run the ball well early. Throw the ball over the Bengals' head. The Bengals are bad defensively. Give up a ton of big plays in the passing game. I think you've got to incorporate Freiermuth a little bit more in the passing game. I'd like to see Mike Williams incorporated in the passing game as well. Buckle down in the red zone. Do not get the ball thrown over your head and be stout in the running game, trying to neutralize the Bungles running game with as few assets as possible. If you can play against their running game in subs consistently in this game and win the numbers game, I think the Steelers have a great advantage. But with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude the show. And like Double H said, happy Turkey Day and football fay, everyone. Please bring it in safely. Hopefully you're listening to the show on your way to where you've got to go. Hopefully you're where you're at listening to the program. And hopefully tomorrow you get some sweet potato pie, get you some turkey, some fixings, and watch 3 outstanding games tomorrow. But with that, we're going to conclude the show. And as always, tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe.